such a wonderful turnout for this event. I don't want to, we do have a lot in store for today, which is really exciting. And so I'm going to start us off without too much delay. Hello everyone, I'm Tanya Willard. I'm from sχڵemetəna territories and also settler Canadian on my mother's side. And I work here at the Belkin as director-curator and visit these beautiful Musqueam territories where I've learned so much and really have learned in some ways my way home through Musqueam territory and meeting elders here like Larry Grant and Leon Sparrow and others over a time when I was working with Kamala Todd for Storyscapes Project, and we got a chance to talk to people from Musqueam. And I like to share a bit about my connection to these territories and people from these communities and what I've learned, because it really grounds us in valuing this space and this place as unceded territory, where the ideas of returning lands and returning authorities to Musqueam, I think, are really present and important in a conversation, especially today, around Indigenous technologies and land management. So I really want to welcome Audrey Siegl here. Audrey from Musqueam, who's an incredible grassroots activist, I'll say caretaker in the sense of caring for people and lands and communities in ways that center safe spaces. I got a chance to hear Audrey yesterday on a panel with a wonderful woman who does equally impressive work at home, Miranda Dick and Michelle Olson. And so I was really grateful to hear a bit of your conversation there and welcome you here. It's down to you.
Thank you. First, I want to raise my hands to each of you and say, Mitza, Huilum, Tina, Hankminum, Kanash, Tamok, Tina Whale, I, Kunishqualo, and Squids Eat Nala, Huikten, Kunisqueak, Tinitzan, Homasquium, Ama, Huikten, Eat, Selena August, and the seat flash. If you've heard me say that before, you might notice I'm going a little bit slower now. I think that modern times is like, go. And I think about how when I was a kid, born in 1973, raised by old timers born in the late 1800s to 1916, they didn't rush. They did not rush. It wasn't the cultural norm. It wasn't 24/7. It wasn't like, why didn't you have your phone on? Or, hey, we're going to do this thing at 4:30 a.m. and your day's done at 11:30. And so I decided to take a breath. And I decided to slow down. And I decided that at least as a start, when I'm speaking Hunkaminum, I'm going to go slow. And then I want you to hear almost like the juiciness of the language. I want you to hear the like and the. I want you to hear all of those sounds, because that's a big part of what makes us who we are. Not unique to us around the world. The Indigenous languages reflect so much of who we are, what our relationship is to each other. In the context, and I also raise my hands to the 16 artists and to the Belkin and to all the, as the ones who raised me would say, the hearts, hands, and minds that made the exhibit possible. I raise my hands to each of you. Thank you for putting so much of yourself into there and for caring and for turning that care into an action. I asked my auntie one day, decades ago, Auntie, it was in language class, I said, they never taught us the word for love. What's the word for love? And she said, oh dear. Love is an action. Love is what you do. There's no word for love. You could tell me you love me, but I know you love me when you show me you love me. And that settled. And then I thought, well, then hope is a verb, and dream is a verb, and change is a verb. And going back to that slowed down place where there's time, not just to breathe, but as we were saying, be regulated. What does regulated even mean? And why do we have to have courses on regulation now? I'm grateful for it, but holy cow, I feel like it's like going back to like kindergarten of like how to care for yourself as a human. And I'll do it. And I'll do it with whoever else wants to do it side by side. And that kind of connects me to this unifying theme of smoke and fire. My people, the Musqueam people, which, and I shared this yesterday, I shared it in as many places as I can. Us referring to ourselves as Musqueam isn't even our word for the site. Musqueam is one of our 82 sites that we have. And it's an important site. It's this beautiful story of the skhڵemetəna, the double-headed serpent. And in the James Point stories, it says, wherever he dragged his fat serpent belly. And I picture it, and I just picture him maneuvering from Olive, from the river, which is not Simon Fraser's, never will be, where he came in. Wherever he dragged his fat serpent belly, is where the creeks and Stalo is river, Statlo is creek, little river. It's so simple. And that's where Camosun Bog, Muquam, which also means bog, and moss is my favorite thing in the whole world. That's where the skhڵemetəna, as a little kid, probably you've heard around the world most Indigenous stories for kids. They all have an element of fear. We didn't get pretty little, princess and this and that. It was, if ever you go up there, we've been telling everybody since we were kids and since they were kids, if you go up there to Muquam and you hear the duck quack, 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 don't go. Don't go. I was like, why? What's the matter with the ducks? It's not a duck. It's the skhڵemetəna. It's calling you in and it's going to eat you because it can fool the kids easier than the adults. I was terrified of ducks my whole life. And just within the last 5 days, I went to Muquam for the first time and I was like, I don't see any ducks. I think we're safe. It's still very much, I share that to demonstrate the connection we have. We've been here since the first sunrise. Science can date it, and archaeologists can dig and they can verify, but what I know is in my bones. What I know is in my language. What I know is in the stars, and what I know is in the earth. And we have in our language, they're called certainty markers. It's the equivalent of like a stack of Bibles in an ocean full of lawyers. When I introduce myself and I say, ma, it is certain that I am the granddaughter of the late Toohey-Wiese and Selena August. That means it is verified. Anybody who wants to challenge that, most likely we're going to war. That's the power of ma. And there's a little set of those words. That ma, for me, is how I know where I come from. And that Musqueam is a very important place. But depending on the terrain and mobility, it's about a 3-minute walk, 5-minute walk west from Musqueam to Mali. Mali is where the majority of our original families come from. So why are we saying we're Musqueam people? Why do I say Tinitsa Musqueam, Tinitsa Maliga? There's so much that separates us from who we actually are, from how we are, from how we have always been. Not just me. And that connection to this theme, this conversation of smoke and of fire. Hike is fire. And fire wasn't just our friend, fire was a gift, fire was a blessing, fire was a necessity. And we moved with respect for our land, I would imagine, for fire, because recognizing the danger of it and looking at how it was not a controlled part of our life, but a respected part of our life. To even 100 years ago. Now, fast forward to today. I don't know how many people here have like worry, concern, fear, anxiety. What is summer going to be like? How smoky is it going to be? How much more is going to burn down? And like, interestingly, superimposing a map of proposed industry over areas that have burnt. Suggestion, check it out. For me, one of our greatest ceremonies is a burning, where we set where for me all year long, like I gather things from my loved ones who've passed on, and once a year we prepare the food and we bring the food and we bring the gifts and we bring our friends and family together who are also honoring their loved ones, and we set a table. We put the food on the table and then we light it up. That's how we feed our loved ones. Because of the fire ban, we're not able to do that for probably half the year now. So people who would normally, like for me, I do it at the end of January on my sister's Memorial Day because that's medicine for me. I couldn't make it through that month. I couldn't make it through that day. If I don't do that on that day, I'm not functional. 7 years later, I'm still not functional. So the fire is the medicine. I'm grateful that mine happens in January when I don't worry about it. The other reality is that about 10 years ago, 12 years ago maybe, 2015, 11 years ago, I started going up to Hattaway. I went up with Greenpeace on a Greenpeace campaign. There's a whole Greenpeace campaign called Audrey versus Shop. And I did it because they said I got to go on their biggest ship up to Hattaway, which meant I got to be in the Moss. I would have done anything to stay on Hattaway. And it was probably one of the most moving experiences in my life. Being up there, I noticed the temperature was cooler. It was like summers I knew as a kid, 23 and 25. The aunties are like, oh, it's getting hot, gotta go inside, turn on the air conditioning. And I thought that it would take a decade to catch up to where I would start to feel uncomfortable. It took 3 years. But the main reason that I go up there for the last few years is because I actually can't breathe here in the summer between the heat and the smog and the concentration of the toxicity in the air. You can watch my oxygen saturation levels drop. So I tend to leave in July and don't come back until September. I don't know if I'm going to be able to go this year, so I had to cave and I replaced my furnace with air conditioning to come through all the vents. But air conditioning has its own problems. Air conditioning is not the solution. Letting nature do what it needs to do to bring the balance back, not just pulling back industry, but humans stepping into their place where they rightfully should have stayed. And I know we're not the ones who created the problem. For a lot of us, like, we had no say. So this means, what does accountability look like to pull that back, to put that back in balance? I said this yesterday, it's something I learned as a kid in physics. The way physics works, if something gets pulled and held up here, it's once it's let go, it's not going to stop in the middle. Physics dictates it's going to go to the equal and opposite. So how do we prepare ourselves? And I'm super curious to check out what each of the 16 artists have represented your connection, not just to fire, smoke, earth, but the connection between each of those things and the necessity of fire. And I'll finish by saying, for a long time, my job was to breathe fire. It was to breathe truth, like a cleansing fire, and burn down anything that stood in the way of the truth and the justice. And I paid a price for that. I paid a price in my body, I paid a price in my community, I paid a price by, I've been listed as a terrorist and eco-terrorist for over 10 years straight. Not that I want to go to the States, but being dictated and controlled of what I'm allowed to do for simply speaking the truth. So I applaud especially the artists and the Belkin and those who are coming to support for sharing your truth, regardless of what it might be, and for sharing that connection between each of us and the necessity of fire and the medicine of fire and the power of fire, and recognizing that, like, in the cycle of it, like feng shui wise, there's constructive and destructive depending on where you put the wood and the water. determines on how the fire is going to move. So let's all be super conscious with our own selves and with the world around us on where we put the water and the wood in relation to the fire, because we do have those little bits of control, and it isn't hopeless, because as long as there's a breath of life, there is hope, and we are the hope. And I'm super excited for the rest of the day, and I raise my hands. I'm going to finish with a super quick verse of one song. Because grounds, science shows, it moves us onto the same wavelength, but anybody who knows music already knows that. So whatever way you want to ground or settle or pray or just call your own spirit home or float, whatever you need to do, please feel free. That kind of worked. I forgot to get rid of my gum, so I just squished it against me. If anybody else ever has to do something where you can't get rid of your gum, but you have to talk or sing. It's a song called Tap. My granny used to brush my head when I was a kid to settle me, because I'm sure you can imagine I needed a lot of settling. I got fired up a lot. It's a very beautiful, gentle song. And my granny sings it whenever she wants to share that calm, peaceful, granny nurturing energy.
Mm-hmm.
Yo, hey, yeah, he, oh, yeah, he, oh, hey, yeah, he, oh, yeah, he, oh, hey. Thank you, and thank you for the time this morning.
Thank you. The staff was really thankful from the Belkin crew to have such a beautiful grounding and consideration of this place and its specificity, and also how we come together in these places. I'm really pleased to have been able to curate this show, co-curate this show with Melanie O'Brien as I was incoming as director. And because it's so effective for me in the places that I live from the interior, and so the ideas of this exhibition really influence and impact my life as well. So I'm really excited to hear from everybody today, because I think what the exhibition has done is bring together a number of conversations and ideas that I think are a seed and a start and maybe a regeneration to think through what's possible and what we can do through the arts in supporting the kinds of changes that we need to see. I want to do a quick logistics. There's washrooms outside this room, as well as over at the Belkin, as well as the second floor. So, but I want to invite the panelists up for the first panel here today. Really want to thank everyone at the Belkin also for coordinating. Naomi and Michael, thank you so much, and everybody who's worked to put the event together. We'll have us in different locations today, and with some different activities. And so thank you so much. I want to introduce Amy Harris, who will facilitate the panel on the far end here. Amy Harris is an experienced research manager and scholar from the UK originally. Harris has now lived in Vancouver for the last 15 years, where she's recently completed, I was like, yeah, sure. Recently completed her PhD in climate communication at Simon Fraser University, and is now the senior research manager at the Center for Climate Justice, our partner for this event. Thank you so much, Amy, at UBC here. Her research investigates the role of museums and exhibitions in helping publics connect with climate futures, through which she was fortunate to visit over 30 climate-focused exhibitions and curators around the world, and she now brings that focus to UBC. And was really a key part of developing this panel and program. So there we go. She's working to advance climate justice principles across multiple interdisciplinary projects, making their findings accessible and usable, and supporting the affiliated faculty and students. She's also working on a book project with 2 colleagues, provisionally titled Grief, Decay, and Futurity. We Need New Ways to Talk About the End of the World. which brings together many of these interconnected issues, which I think you will hear from you as well. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. It's so good to be here and see so many faces for this panel. Thank you also for the welcome from Audrey. That was really beautiful. I'd also like to acknowledge myself on the land as well. As a settler, striving to be an ally always. I live with the discomfort of being a British person on these lands and also working in museums and exhibitions. So I sit with that and think about my history and my present as being somewhere that is an ongoing process that needs mending. As Tanya said, my PhD research was grounded in speaking to both curators and visitors about why exhibitions are such important spaces for having these kinds of conversations. So I'm really excited about this conversation that we're going to be having today. I'm thrilled to be moderating the panel. We're going to start by having some presentations and then a conversation, and then hopefully have time for some questions from the audience at the end. So I'm going to introduce each panelist and then they'll present and then we'll begin the conversation. So Taylor Baptiste, who's presenting first, is an interdisciplinary artist from the Osoyoos Indian band of the Syilx Okanagan Nation. Based in Inkameep, a landscape of sagebrush and wild roses between the mountains and Osoyoos Lake, her practice is rooted in family, community, and ancestral history. Drawing from Syilx storytelling and ways of knowing, her work reflects an ongoing relationship with the land and all living things, and a commitment to listening to the places and teachings that continue to shape her. In 2024, Taylor earned her Bachelor of Fine Arts from Emily Carr University of Art and Design, and she's since returned to Inkameep, where she lives and works as both an artist and a cultural coordinator at the Inkameep Desert Cultural Centre. And she describes these roles as deeply interconnected. Her work at the centre supports community-based research and archiving, the repatriation of cultural and community belongings, and the facilitation of workshops centred on Syilx knowledge, land-based teachings, and cultural continuity. Clint Burnham was born in the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation in Comox, BC, and is Professor of English at Simon Fraser University. His most recent book is Maori Ruti and Climate Change, From Grief to Creativity, and he co-edited with Paul Kingsbury, Lacan and the Environment. His latest book of poetry is the Goldberg Variations, and his selected poems will be published in the UK by the 87 Press in 2028. And then Liz Toohey-Wiese is a settler artist residing on the homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. She's a graduate from the MFA program at NSCAD University and completed her undergraduate degree in painting at Emily Carr University, also undertaking coursework at the University of Victoria and the École Nationale des Beaux-Arts in De Leon. She's taken part in solo and group shows across Canada and has undertaken artist residencies at the Soyintula Art Shed, the Seitani Cultural Centre, Island Mountain Arts, the Similkameen Artist Residency, Artscape Gibraltar Point, and the Klondike Institute for Arts and Culture. She's deeply interested in the history of landscape painting, and her paintings explore contemporary relationships between identity and place. Her recent work explores the complicated topic of wildfires and their connections to tourism, economy, grief, and renewal. She's the co-founder of the artist book series Fire Season and a full-time faculty in the Fine Arts Department at Conlon Polytechnic University. So I'd like you to join me in welcoming these panelists for our panel called Wildfire, Smoke, Creativity, and Grief. And start with Taylor.
Sorry. Pull this up here. Well, first of all, the case Naxio, Isquis Quatroya can tell Inkmeet, Tali can lead, Tali can Ioch Apanata Skohalt. Good morning, everybody. My traditional name is Quatroya, which translates to chipmunk, given to me by the late Modesta Butterton. My English name is Taylor Baptiste Sparrow. I am from the Osoyoos Indian band of the Okanagan Nation living in Inkmeet. And my husband is Brett Sparrow from Musqueam. And so Lemon Audrey for the beautiful welcome. It makes me really happy to be welcomed back into my second home here. And a lot of what you said in your welcome really resonated with me in regards to slowing down and being okay with that in this fast-paced world. This is just a warning, I typically cry when I talk about this work. And I used to apologize for that, but I'm not anymore. So yeah, with that, I'll get started. I'm going to be talking about a body of work that I made in response to the Ankeny Creek wildfire, which happened in 2021 in my home community of Osoyoos. The day that it started was a really wild experience. My husband's family had literally just arrived into town, parked their trailer. We were about to have a big family weekend with my whole family and his whole family. And we live in the houses just behind these ones here, next to the mountain in Ankeny. And we saw a little spiral of smoke. And we had, just gotten to the beach, and within an hour, it looked like this, and which led to evacuating my parents' home. At the time, my husband and I were living in Vancouver, and so we were just home for a visit. And we evacuated my parents to my brother Wade's house, about 15 kilometers north to the town of Oliver, where they were safe for a few days, but within about 4 days, the fire had spread those 15 kilometers as well, and we had to evacuate my brother and my parents and my brother's whole family to my auntie's house. So 2 big evacuations within a week was very, very intense, as I'm sure you can imagine or may have experienced yourself. Just for reference, as you can see here, the Ankeny Creek wildfire happened. It was on for about 45 to 50 days, so it started in July. And it wasn't declared as like a held fire or being out until early September. It burnt about 60% of my community's reserve land. And in our reserve, we have a lot of endangered plant and animal species as well, including like antelope brush and many other species. And as you can imagine, when a fire this scale happens, not only are the people evacuating, but all of the living beings that also call this place home. So there was a lot of rattlesnakes and deer and birds and just many loved ones fleeing the scene of our home. And so at the time I was doing my BFA at Emily Carr University. And so I was taking a weaving sculptural class, and we had to, one of our prompts was to create a weaving out of like not standard materials. And in Okanagan culture, we would weave pine needles into baskets. And so I wove this fire extinguisher out of pine needles because it was just something that was heavy on my heart and mind. Controlled burns and traditional burns are a practice that has been outlawed and banned for decades, and we are just now starting to work together with local fire departments and the government to do more controlled burns to prevent the larger devastation that happens. And so this was the first sculpture that really helped me start to process what happened through the Ankeny Creek wildfire. And after I finished it, I just felt like, I'm not done. I still have a lot of feelings on my heart and mind that I had to express in some way. And so part of my practice as well, it was during the COVID pandemic and living far from home. So when I would go home to Osoyoos, I would gather as much land-based materials as I could to bring back with me home to Musqueam to continue to work with and use during my schooling. And so I harvested a lot of pine needles and just began weaving. I didn't know what I was going to weave them into. And so at first I started just weaving a lot of pine needles together into lines. And my brother Wade is the only Osoyoos Indian band member on the Oliver Fire Department. And so watching him be so strong through that whole experience, I really wanted to make artwork to honor him, but all of the other firefighters that put their lives on the line to protect us and to protect the land. And so through a lot of conversations I had with many different beautiful people, I was gifted used firefighter gear, and I wanted to put adornments and onto them and turn them into cultural regalia to represent the really important job that they're doing. So this was the first part of regalia that I made onto some used firefighter pants. And from there, it just kept growing and didn't stop for a couple of years. And so I worked with my community's language house, and we worked on developing a set of vocabulary that, didn't exist prior. Like, we didn't have traditionally, obviously, a word for firefighter, but we did have words for important roles, like what Audrey was speaking about earlier in regards to like cultural burnings. But our language house developed this word, skhڵemetəna, which translates to one who puts out the light. And so this I put on the back where the nameplate of the firefighters are, onto the back of the jacket, and was able to photograph all of this gear at the Oliver Fire Department in my brother's locker, which was really, really special. This is another sculpture that came out of this body of work. I kind of have several streams of my art practice going at any given time, and part of that as well is pictographs and working with Toohey-Wiese ochre pigment in my work. And so this is a diptych sculpture, a two-piece sculpture of flames, but within the flames, I painted pictographs depicting what that first day of the Ancient Creek wildfire was like. So you can see each member of my family holding hands and evacuating. You can see the planes coming in, the wind. Along the bottom of the left sculpture there's about 45 to 50 dots representing each day that the Ancient Creek fire happened for. And so all of these sculptural pieces kind of had their first debut, I guess I could call it. The first time I showed them out publicly to the world was last fall at the Ore Gallery. And so all of these pieces I've been developing over the last 4 years, and in many Indigenous cultures, sometimes you'll do a memorial after 1 year, but sometimes you'll also do them after 4. And so I kind of developed this body of work over 4 years, and now it's out in the world, but most of the time I feel like my part of this chapter is like closed, but for everybody else, they're just getting to see it for the first time. So sometimes it does feel interesting for me to go back and revisit all of these works that I made a couple of years ago, but now they're out in the world. And so with the regalia, I completed both like a grass dancer outfit and a jingle dress dancing outfit, which are powwow regalias. And so I'm super thankful that my cousin Gage and my cousin Jenna happily agreed to dance these regalias on the land where the Ancient Creek fire happened. But as well as when this film was being made, about a month prior to it, completely in a separate fire incident, my parents lost their home in a fire. And so they danced this regalia next to my parents' home. And so in full transparency, I think in any other scenario, I may have sent my regrets on coming today, just due to many losses that have happened in both my community and my husband's community this month. But I felt like because this gathering is already about grief and fire, I know everybody in the room was coming today to discuss that intent. And so I was like, okay, it's okay if I cry in front of everybody today. We're already expecting it. But yeah, we together, Gage, Jenna, and I, we discussed what the intentions were in dancing these regalias on the land there. You know, a grass dancer's role is to be the first to go out onto the land and stomp down the grasses to prep the area for dance. And so Gage was the first to go out and dance on the land here. And it felt very healing for myself to see this happen in the space where my parents' fire was. And all my brothers and my parents were kind of up the hill behind the fence here, just happily watching as well. And then Jenna went in, and so the jingle dress is also a healing dance. Normally there's cones on the dress that, as you're dancing, the sound is healing. And so instead of using traditional cones, I replaced them with pine cones that are also from the site. And so all of the pine needles and pine cones come from Inkmeat there as well. And so this is done together here. And so I have a little bit of the short film. I know we are short for time today, but I'm just going to pull up part of that film, Fireline Kinship, which is what the full body of work is named after, this film. And so this film, so in this short film, it's about 5 minutes long, but we have drone footage going over where the Inkmeat Creek wildfire happened, as well as throughout the Oliver Fire Department, and then you'll get That's My Brother Wade. And so, yeah, normally when I play this film, my cousin Amy Baptiste is singing Candace Gabriel's Water Song throughout the background. And it's a very beautiful, slow, grounding song. And I think throughout making this whole body of work, I wanted to make artwork about fire without showing literal fire. Because when I reflect back on the Inkmeat Creek wildfire now, 6 years later, what I remember most is the community, both banding together to help, whether it was evacuate, bringing food, checking in, just taking care of one another, as well as the firefighters. And so in my community, of the Osage Indian Band, we had a really large dinner in the months following with the fire departments and all of the emergency personnel that worked on the fire to just give thanks for them. And that's also what I wanted this film to be. Well, it's my cousin Jenna. And it was just such a beautiful day. And I feel like in another sense too, it helped me kind of heal from this chapter as well of, fire and devastation and not living at home with my family while they were experiencing this as well. Yeah. And so now when I reflect back on this work, I definitely just think like it helped me get through a lot of those times. But now that it's been out into the world, where others get to do it, and it's not just me alone in my studio processing through all of this work, it's really helped a lot of people from my own community as well, to see these regalias, which are not traditional regalias, but just the medicine that they've been able to bring to people. And it's just my hope that when others do it, if they've experienced all of the complicated experiences that trauma brings, that it can help ease a bit of those feelings in them as well.
Thank you so much, Taylor. Clint.
I need light.
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
A little bit of light.
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you. I just want to make a quick nod to people I've heard from over for so many years now who are in the room, including Audrey and Tanya, Colin and Lorna, Melanie, but I'll just go into it. Here's an abstract I used when I gave a longer version of this talk last month in the UK. The late Mari Ruti argued that sublimation, qua creativity, can be a progressive way of encountering trauma and grief. This was a hard-won lesson she wrenched from her own terminal cancer diagnosis. Ruti died in 2023, and I extend the logic of her argument via 2023 Summer of Forest Fires, Canada's worst ever, with ancillary smoke closing down Broadway and reaching Europe. Is grief fungible, I ask? Does it stack, or does some lack, as Ruti mused, actually help us deal with the trauma? Ruti draws on Jacques Lacan's theory of sublimation, raising an object to the dignity of das Ding, as he memorably put it, and I follow this argument with stops in climate fiction, garbage art, Cézanne, and Hitchcock. Ruti points out a fundamental contradiction in Lacan's theory of desire. On the one hand, we can only be guilty of giving ground relative to our desire. This is the basis for Lacanian ethics. And yet, he also tells us that desire is extimate. It is the desire of the other. We seek to desire the other, to be desired by the other, to have the same desire as the other. I also gave a talk in February for an exhibition curated by Sasha Langford and Jonathan Middleton. Like today's event, this was in an art world context at the Odeon Gallery at SFU Woodbridge, or in the Goldcorp Center for the Arts if we want to indicate our debt to resource extraction. Although looking around this room, perhaps we shouldn't neglect the university discourse, as Lacan would say. I'm co-organizing a conference on Lacan in the university next weekend at the Western Front, so that context is on my mind. But for what I am talking about today, I should note that these ideas are ones I developed in my most recent book, Mari Ruti and Climate Change, From Grief to Creativity. What I want to pull out of that book are two sets of ideas. First, that grief, as a response to trauma, can be thought of in an emancipatory way, in terms of its fungibility, of how we deal with grief as it starts to pile up, if we can stack it. Second, that drawing on psychoanalysis, especially the work of Lacan, Judith Kristeva, and Melanie Klein, Mari Ruti argued that sublimation, or creativity, are ways in which we can respond to grief, to that trauma or lack. I'll start with the last point first because it is the most complex, I think, and technical or theoretical. Ruti makes two arguments here. One, she draws a distinction between constitutive and contingent lack or trauma. That is first the psychoanalytic insight that we are all fundamentally lacking. We have an unconscious. We do things for reasons we do not understand, and that's a good thing. If we did not lack, there wouldn't be any reason to fall in love, or make art, or to be in the world. Why would I look at that tree or stream or mountain if there was not some gap between me and the tree or stream or mountain? We use words, a language that pre-exists us. We have to relate to other human or non-human beings. This is constitutive lack. Then we encounter traumas or lacks that are more contingent. Ruti was thinking about this in the last 5 years of her life when she faced a terminal cancer diagnosis. Illness or death, violence, war, climate disaster. Significantly, Ruti argued that the capacity to manage our constitutive lack can then help us deal with our contingent lack, as she said it was for her cancer diagnosis. I'm not sure if I agree with her. However, it's also important to know that Ruti distinguishes between those two kinds of lacks, constitutive and contingent, from what we might think of as structural or socioeconomic lack or trauma, that which is caused by racism, gender, colonialism, poverty. So Ruti argued that a way in which to deal with such lack or trauma, or at least the first two, constitutive and contingent, was through creativity, sublimation. Lacan famously defined sublimation as the raising of an object to the dignity of the thing, das Ding, and gave as an example a poet putting a chain of matchboxes around his room. An ordinary object becomes a work of art. Lacan also made the same claim about Cézanne's still life paintings of fruit, so he dealt with canonical art as well. This sublimation, this making of art, Ruti argued, was a response to lack. Now, I had been thinking about these ideas of Ruti's when, in 2023, I encountered 3 occasions for grief. First, a month or so after I heard her speak at a conference in Vermont, I learned that Ruti had died of breast cancer in early June. But that summer was also, as you may remember, the worst year ever for wildfires in Canada. 15 million hectares burned, over 6,000 major fires, smoke over much of the country, enveloping the east coast of the United States, floating over to Europe, towns evacuated, firefighters recruited from Australia and South Africa and France. Where I live, in the city of Vancouver on Canada's west coast, on, as we say, the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including those of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Coquitlam nations. The smoke was sometimes present, but that wasn't enough. I had to go camping in the Slocan Valley and follow those bursts of red sigils on the BC Wildfire app on my phone. There's something about waking up in the middle of the night and smelling forest fire smoke. I'm sure I don't have to tell anyone in this room. In August of that year, my father died, which, while it happened suddenly, was not entirely a surprise. He'd had dementia for the previous 2 years. In some ways, he was already not there, between 2 deaths, as we say in the jargon. I had pre-grieved, as a character puts it on the TV show Succession. The climate crisis, the deaths of 2 people close to me, to which grief should I attend? Did I have a choice? That is, I found these emotions piling on and conflicting with each other. I had not done grieving for Mari as the forest fires escalated, but my chronology was misplaced. Grief resists such neat ordering. For a while, I had been thinking about ecological or climate grief specifically after seeing Mari in April, but before her death in June. The question of how to sort these different traumas had preoccupied my mind for a couple of years, since giving a talk on the clusterfuck of 2020 in an online conference in the fall of that year. There, I referred to the pandemic, anti-Black state violence, and the climate disaster as different claimants on our attention. Clusterfuck, a charged and libidinal signifier rather than the more anodyne polycrisis, seemed to me to fit the situation better. So this is what I want to conclude with today, thinking about how the questions of the fungibility of grief, that is when we become aware of a difference between one lack and another, when feeling overwhelmed by the forest fires feels different than the loss of one's friend, and how it stacks if they help us deal with one or the other, as Ruti argues, or makes them worse. This has an emancipatory politics because of how it relates to the polycrisis, that clusterfuck. This is actually the first time I've been able to make that connection in words, so I'm grateful to Melanie and Amy for the opportunity to speak to you today. Here we can think of the clinical nostrum that an analysan's presenting symptom is rarely that which marks their lack. If a patient comes in and says they're troubled by forest fires or rising sea levels, that this gives them anxiety, then the job of the clinic is to move past those utterances, the sujet dénoncé or the enunciating subject, and follow the network of signifiers, the talking cure, to the fundamental fantasy, the cleavage and the jouissance, the sujet d'énonciation, or the subject of the statement, the unconscious. Indeed, when the subject declares that their mother died 2 years ago and now a log forest's devastation brings it all back, or if I find myself unable to grieve my father's recent death because my grief stack is already filled up with worrying about the summer of 2023's forest fires, about breathing that smoke, the fungibility of this trauma or grief, its contingency, to return to Rudi's keyword, should also give us pause. Perhaps the stackable isn't scalable to account for the idiosyncratic. And then idiosyncratic, another word Ruti uses to describe trauma, seems more individual, personal, the singularity that is a hallmark of Rudi's thinking. Etymologically, the word idiosyncratic carries suggestions of blaming the victim, attributable to individual disposition, susceptibility, or character, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, but also owing, as with idiom or idiot, to the ancient Greek word idios, meaning a private or lay, but also uneducated person. I confess that I do like the idiotic connotations of idiosyncratic. Surely I was an idiot to go camping in the wilderness during Canada's worst forest fire season in history. But this is my final paragraph, but let's return to creativity or sublimation. In my book, I talk about Adan Velicello's Saturation 00 from 2017, a 15 or 20 foot high U-shaped sculpture made from recycled car filter paper. I saw the artwork at a survey exhibition, Forecast Form, Art in the Caribbean Diaspora in the 1990s to today at the ICA Boston. I said Saturation 00 is constructed with recycled car filters. It has in effect been made by a combination of the impurities that are filtered out from a car or truck's engine oil and the structure of the filter paper itself. I was thinking about this way of making art, raising an object to the dignity of the thing, when Taylor was, not just now, but last week when we were chatting, when Taylor was talking about her wildfire regalia, and in particular the jackets and boots smudged with wildfire smoke, or Liz's August 6th ash hands. And these all seem similar in a way to the indexicality of Germaine Coe's prayer, which you can see there. The prayer, or the ash hands, or the regalia, they are like our grief. We aren't sure what they point to. Thank you.
So thanks so much for having me here to talk about my 3 favorite topics in the world, which are wildfires, art, and grief. I'm going to start by giving an introduction to my own artistic practice that's revolved around the topic of wildfires for 8 years now. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the fire season book that I work on. And I'm going to also talk about the eco-grief art workshops that I've started developing over the past 2 years that I bring into communities that have been affected by wildfires. And there's me in the Little Blue River Fire, which is one of the biggest wildfire burns I've ever been in. It's right on the BC-Yukon border. So I'm going to go back to the beginning for me, which for maybe some of you, you also remember. In the summer of 2017, we had smoke in Vancouver for what felt like 6 weeks straight in my memory. And all that smoke was coming from the Plateau Fire, which was a 500,000 hectare fire that was burning in the Chilcotin region of BC. The smoke, like I said, hung around for what felt like 6 weeks straight. The following winter, I created a series of landscape paintings depicting figures taking part in summer recreation activities with fires burning around the edges of the paintings. Though that summer I didn't see wildfires up close, their psychic presence hung around on a series of road trips, camping trips, and in this painting, a kayak trip I took up Indian Arm. I think that these paintings were an attempt to integrate what felt like a new reality, a permanent shift in my understanding of what summer is. The following year, wildfires would start creeping in from the peripheries of my paintings and start to come front and center in my work. This painting, Wish You Were Here, was from a series called Wildfire Tourism, where I took tourist slogans and overlaid them on top of images of burning forests. The recontextualization of these phrases brought new meanings into these words, or maybe some new questions. Wish you were here? What does it mean to wish someone into an inferno? How are 2 of BC's biggest economies, namely forestry and tourism, being completely reshaped by the increased presence of wildfire on these landscapes? And how do we grapple with these new realities? This question started expanding through other forms of tourist ephemera, so I made this piece, Come Back Soon, which started as a similar postcard design, but then I turned it into a billboard and I installed it along Highway 97 on the road in between Burnham and Kamloops. What would a passing tourist think? It didn't put my name anywhere on the billboard, and I wondered if someone driving by might assume that this was installed by BC Wildfire. Who is being asked to come back soon? Is it the tourist being invited to return? That's where the invitation usually points if we read these words on a sign at the edge of a small town. Or is the forest being asked to come back soon after being burned down in a fire? Or maybe it's the fire who's being asked to return. In a landscape such as the Okanagan that was historically fire adapted to have wildfire pass through every 10 to 15 years. The following summer, I would be in Burnham when the entire town was put on evacuation alert during the White Rock Lake fire, which burned down the town of Monty Lake, which is just a stone's throw from Burnham. I began experimenting this summer with turning wildfire ash into paint, and I did this series of paintings you see here based off images I found on a local Facebook group. During the fire, members of the group were posting images of burnt debris that was flying across Okanagan Lake, about 3 kilometers, into Vernon and landing in people's front yards and driveways. These photographs repeated, each person posting images of debris alongside their hands, and I think it was a method to show scale, but the image just became this image of surrender for me, a human admitting their powerlessness in the face of something so much larger than them. So here's some larger images of those paintings. Text and installation have remained something I explore in my work alongside painting, with this more recent piece forced into a great and difficult transformation, being installed in the Little Blue River fire. Like I said, one of the largest fires I've ever driven through, on my way to an artist residency in Dawson City. As I was driving, I was listening to a recording of a lecture on Buddhist philosophy, and this was a line that was spoken, and it just really struck me as I was driving through the wildfire. I thought, it really sounds like they're talking about a forest. Borrowing the aesthetics of BC recreation site signs, I carved this text into a handmade sign and returned to the burn on my way home to install the work. So beyond my own work, another large part of my practice is producing these books called Fire Season. Along with my collaborator, Amory Abbott, we release a call for submissions biannually, and we collect work from both visual artists and writers on the topic of wildfires. Across a wide range of experiences with fire, from urban and rural contributors, academics, back to the landers, wildfire fighters, forestry workers, and artists, of course, those submissions form each edition of the book. We call it a form of collective sense-making, trying to accurately point to the moment of time that we are in with our human relationship to wildfire. A really enjoyable part of the curation process is finding works to pair with each other. Here in this slide, we see Kyle Sherman's painting on the left of a burning cabin in the woods entitled All the Little Fires We Could Not Contain, alongside Jonathan Van Elslander's poem Autumn. Jonathan is a trained biologist who has worked a lot in forestry, and his poem here dreams of a future world where we have a better relationship with our forests here in BC. One thing we realized early on in making these books is that wildfire holds a lot of contradictions. It's both terrifying and beautiful, it's both destructive and restorative. We try our best to present those contradictions fairly in our books, to hold space for the complexity of what people are feeling. There's quite a range of emotional impacts that wildfire has on those affected by it. Some contributors choose to tap into their fear and pain, some choose to see wildfire metaphorically, and some choose to use humor as an entry point. And we see that here on the illustration on the left-hand side, a drawing by Sawyer Anderson entitled, Guy Responds to Increasingly Apocalyptic Conditions by Pressure Washing the Driveway. For my own art practice and working on the Fire Season books, in the last 2 years, I set out to develop community art workshops that I could bring into places that had been directly impacted by wildfire. This was an attempt to build reciprocal relationships with the communities I'm interacting with on artist residencies, which are often happening in rural BC. I also wanted to offer the method that had served me to grapple with an increasingly flammable reality, namely that creative practice and making in community serve as an important form of collective sublimation of grief. So here's some images from the Arts Wells Festival last year, where I did these eco-grief workshops, and the Arts Wells Festival was canceled the year previous because of a wildfire with 3 days' notice. So we worked on this together and talked about that experience. I start these workshops by demonstrating to participants how to make wildfire ash into paint. Often I specifically collect ash from the wildfire burn that affected the town in the previous fire season. And you can see here I often also go out and collect burnt sticks, pine cones, and debris from the burn, both to inspire the images we create and to use charcoal directly as an art material. What is normally seen as artifacts of destruction could now be repurposed as objects of creation. And here's the workshop I did in Kelowna with the field lab and some students in the field lab there. From our paintings we make together, we cut up our paintings and we make collage work. That's partially to take the preciousness out of the art that the participants are making because I want to make these workshops equally accessible to both artists and non-artists. And I kind of realized that it didn't really matter the outcome of what we were making. It was just that we were all spending time together and talking and working with our hands. We follow quilt patterns to construct our collages, and you can see here an example of the finished quilt that we might end up making together. Quilts are this beautiful metaphor for community work that looks forward. They are heirloom objects that are entrusted to the future. And I'm bringing this workshop to Northern BC next week. I've been invited to do some prescribed burning with the Gitniau First Nations, which I'm really excited about. And I'm taking this workshop to Jasper next month to work with the community there. So in conclusion, here are some things I've thought about with art and wildfires. My brother is a climate scientist, and we have a lot of interesting conversations about climate change. And thinking also too that science is so often what is leaned on to understand a topic like climate change. I would find it very difficult to be in a field that is under enormous pressure to have the solution or an answer to what we need to do about a problem as large as this is. But even though art is often something that is allowed to sit with unanswerable questions, I think I do sometimes feel this pressure to have an answer as an artist as well. A friend told me he had lent Fire Season to an acquaintance and afterwards asked her what she thought about it. She thought it was interesting, but ultimately she felt unsatisfied as there was no takeaway from the book. She expressed an idea of, what am I supposed to do with the knowledge I have now? I never met this acquaintance, but if I did, my response to her would be, I'm not sure, I can't answer that for you. We're gonna have to find some way to carry on and to love the world as it's burning around us and to look very squarely at what we have lost and what there is left to save. Creative practice is what helps me do that, to look really honestly, to depict as honestly as possible, and to share entry points into this reality that might serve as entry points for other people as well. Attention serves as an expression of love, so looking at something through our creative practice is an act of loving that thing. So thank you so much to my panel members for your thoughtful presentations, and I'm excited to grapple with these questions together.
Thank you so much, everybody. You can see why the name of our panel brought all these people together in a really wonderful way. And I'd firstly like to ask, actually, to give you the opportunity to respond to each other. If there's anything that you want to kind of comment on each other's kind of talks or presentations this morning.
I know we've been like loosely in contact over the years through Fire Season and a lot of Zoom calls and emails, and I'm just really happy I got to sit and listen to you really talk about your practice, even if it was short. Yeah, I'm just really appreciative of that. Thanks. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. As I said at the beginning, some of my work is about museums and exhibitions and how community kind of finds those spaces as useful for kind of coming to make sense of some of the concepts that we're talking about. So just wondering if there's any kind of particular moments that you can speak to that you've seen communities that you engage with either respond to your work or how you've seen it land in some of those spaces. Liz, maybe start with you.
How it lands in community changes all the time. My work makes a lot more sense in rural BC. Like, I think I have really interesting conversations with people in these places where people have been evacuated and, you know, or live with the reality of being on an evacuation alert. I don't know if people know, evacuation alert, you don't have to leave yet. Evacuation order, you have to leave immediately. But sometimes you live with an evacuation alert for like 6 weeks at a time. And if that order happens while you're out of your house, you can't go home and get your stuff. So this was the experience being in Burnham. My brother was visiting at the time, and we would just pack the car and drive all our stuff around all day because if you can't go home. So I think a lot of these realities are really, we don't experience them in Vancouver. It's not really like, it's not part of people's lived realities. So the impact of those things I think are felt really different in different places in BC. And I think often people in the communities I work with in rural BC are very appreciative that someone is curious enough to like listen to them and listen to their experience, and through doing these workshops as well, just creating a space for people to talk to each other. I'm not the expert is everyone else in the room, so trying to make space just for other people to have conversations with each other. Yeah.
Is there anything from the work community that you want to particularly speak to?
I think just in reflection over the last several years with this, you know, in our day-to-day lives, we get so separated into, you know, who you work with, who's your family, who you see every day, who you might even like avoid or something. But when fire happens, we're all equals, and how quickly you get to see the beauty of humanity and people just pulling together, both rurally and in the city. I find that, I think for me personally, like just being married to somebody from Musqueam, and seeing how much the community of Musqueam and my community have through that been able to gather together and take care of each other. I'm super grateful the community of Musqueam rallied around my family and my community both after the Inconvenient fire and my parents' fire. And yeah, like just echoing Liz of just providing intentional time and spaces together to discuss these topics.
Clint, your work kind of brings people together in a different way.
Well,
Community.
yeah, I mean, I was thinking as a community, I mean, I teach, and my students and that generation of people in their late teens and early 20s, and the kind of utter despair they feel when faced with the climate crisis. And on the one hand, I mean, I kind of chuckled when Liz, you talked about a friend of a friend who wanted what the takeaway was. But then remember, we were talking about this the other day on our Zoom thing, right? You know, and I mean, I do say I'm very leery of hope and so on. I'm very leery of the discourse that says we should have a positive message and all this kind of stuff. But what I do say to students is that the thinking critically, and especially I teach in the literature department, can actually help to fight the climate crisis in ways that perhaps we shouldn't expect scientists to. I mean, for one thing, scientists sometimes aren't very good communicators. Sorry to say, a big shocker there, I know. But also because of the ways in which this current kind of populist moment has such a suspicion towards university, towards science, and all this kind of stuff that we know about, right? So in that kind of context, I think a critical thinking, if not giving us this kind of la sentimental hope, everything's going to be fine, but at least can help us to understand the problem better, and that I hope it can be helpful.
Thank you. One of my favorite things to quote is artists can scream, scientists can't, which is a quote from Marta Curran. And I think while there are some scientists screaming, kind of now as we're getting kind of scientists protests and chaining themselves to buildings, I think it does speak to the interpretation and meaning that people can find in artworks a lot of the time.
And also just one more thing, I'm sorry.
Yeah, please.
I just wanted to add, we were talking about this before, but in some ways the role that psychoanalysis has begun to play, and even, you know, a hard-nosed Marxist like Andreas Malm, you know, who wrote Fossil Capital and How to Blow Up a Pipeline, is now talking about Freud, saying, well, why is it with all this information we know, and yet we still don't act? And it's not simply, we can't just blame, you know, top-down kind of this misinformation, which is there, to be sure. You know, Naomi Oreskes' book, Merchants of Doubt, is very clear on this. But it's also, there's something in terms of our inability to act out of our misgivings and other kind of unconscious sort of desires and anxieties and so on, that has a role to play as well.
Thank you. I want to give the audience a chance to ask a question or two, if we can have time, if anyone has anything burning that they'd like to ask.
Oh.
I know,
Too
I didn't even. Yes, please.
I'm not the best at asking questions, so I'll try to make it succinct. I think my question is maybe connected towards Clint, but anyone who can end up contributing. I thought it was really interesting to bring the Kingian psychoanalysis into the discussion, because fire is so often used as a metaphor for desire. So that was quite interesting. But I don't know. I at least my knowledge of this specific brain psychoanalysis, you know, the desire is often viewed as something kind of internal, and the absence or lack that people feel that sort of characterizes the relationship with the world is often something that is quite distinct and very internal. But then in the case of wildfires, the absence that is generated is, you know, something that is outside of us. You know, it is in sort of the world around us. It's something that we observe that often seems to be external. And I would just be curious to kind of hear your thoughts on that, as generally or as specifically as you would like to express them. You know, how does that absence, that to me feels like quite central to the understanding of the psyche, relate to this experience of absence that is created by a destructive force like the wildfire or some other natural disaster?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I don't know why you kind of ask questions. But I think very quickly, and I said this at the beginning too, but it might have got lost in the jargon. I mean, Lacan also argued that desire is extimate. It's interior but exterior at the same time. So our desire is social. He was not just saying it's individual. It has to do with what the other wants. We're social beings. And so I mean, an example I give quite often when you're teaching in our profession, we talk about the teachable text, a poem or a novel that lands well with the students. And so that, in that case, their desire to learn something matches our own desire. And so then when there's something like a fire, I mean, I think the amazing contradictions around this whole idea of controlled burns, way in which indigenous people for millennia have had this practice, and I'm not going to hopefully not be speaking out my hat here, but like this practice of burning as a way to regenerate the landscape, as I understand it, and then it taking on a kind of a cultural and ceremonial sort of significance. And so then what happens that's a fire, that's burning, that is a positive thing, or we think of fire in terms of, you know, heating us and warming us up and so on, right? There are many positive connotations for fire that are broadly, you know, are in many cultures. But then what happens when it becomes too much of something, when it becomes dangerous? And so there, our desire, which may be, you know, symbolized by fire itself, when our desire becomes too dangerous in a way. So that, I think, accounts in some ways for specifically our attitudes around wildfires and so on, right? I mean, for the longest time, the colonial project was to suppress wildfires, was to make controlled burnings illegal. And this is all across North America, and not just in North America, many other parts of the world, the British colonial project in particular. And this, of course, led to more fires, because then I'm not a scientist, so I'll just stop talking, but we know what I'm talking about, right? And so that is to say that we have to have that kind of way of thinking about fire itself that is attenuated to these nuances. And this, I think, is something that psychoanalysis helps us with. Thank you.
Can I riff off this?
Yeah.
My friend Judy's in the audience, and I just really remember going to an exhibition in Vernon, a wildfire art show that was happening at the Vernon Art Gallery. And Judy was with me and two other artist friends who, Amory Abbott, who I work on the Fire Season book with, and Andreas Ripkauskas, who's a photographer in Kelowna. And so we're having the wildfire beers after this show. And Judy asked us, how did you all get into wildfires at the beginning? Like, what happened? And all three of us, we had a long-term relationship breakup or a divorce. And that was when we got interested in wildfires. Like, and so I think—
Burn it all down!
This is the thing I was thinking about with Clint's book, and this idea of, like, does grief stack? And I'm not sure I can answer if grief stacks, but what I've thought about in my own practice is, like, personal loss helps us understand collective loss, and collective loss helps us understand personal loss. Like, if your house hasn't burned down in a wildfire, you've had a wildfire in your life. Like, a relationship has ended, someone's gotten sick, someone's died unexpectedly. And this idea of, like, a big rupture that will, you know, something new will come out of it, and there will be healing and there will be growth. But when you're in it, it's like it is in the moment of devastation. Like, I think that this metaphor I found really comforting at times, and wildfires are very natural in that way. Like, you can see them pop up in your life in all these different forms. And I've thought about that too, of you know, this question of why are we not doing enough about the climate crisis? And I think that grief is really hard for people to grapple with. And I think this is the thing, and in doing these workshops, that I'm just trying to create the container
for people to look at their grief, but it's nothing to do with me. Like I'm not doing anything. It's people having a little bit of space to talk about these things. And you talked about with your own art practice, that creating, the container, to borrow a psychoanalytic term, for people to start to process that stuff. The other thought I've had recently is maybe it's not even that grief is so hard to feel, but like joy and love, how much we love the world, maybe that's really hard to feel, because we would have to grapple with the fact that if we felt the full brunt of our love for this place, we would have to grapple with the fact that it is disappearing before our eyes. And big emotions are hard for anyone to deal with. So finding these ways, like sublimating through our practice, I think is really useful in that way, to just let out little bits of those energy before they become, this is the controlled burn, and it's before they become the conflagration. Yeah.
Thank you. And while I know we were resisting takeaways as a thing, I think there's lots of provocations that you've all spoken to that I think people can think more about as we move into our next stage of today. So if you'd like to, again, join me with thanking the panel for today, I'm going to hand over to Astrida, who's going to take us for our next session. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Astrida. We're going to now leave the room if you wish. It's an invitation. If you don't want to come on a walk with us, you're welcome to stay here. If you do want to join us for a very short in distance walk that will take us up to lunchtime, we're going to meet outside right here in the corner in about 5 minutes, or however long it takes you to pee. I'm going to put my hat on so you can see where I am. It might rain, so you might want to bring your jacket or whatever you need to feel comfortable. And we'll see you there if you wish.
Well, welcome back, everybody. I don't know if you can hear me. Yes? Now you can. Okay. Welcome back for this afternoon's panel, and it's great for those of you returning and those of you that have just joined us. My name is Melanie O'Brien. I am Associate Director and Curator at the Belkin, and so happily convening this panel, and also the co-curator of the exhibition, The Structure of Smoke. So the rundown of this afternoon's events is this panel, Developer Lightning, and then we'll be followed by a tour of the Belkin exhibition from 3 to 4, for those of you that want to join us. We've titled this afternoon's panel Developer Lightning. So over the next hour, we're going to hear from artists Roy-Bois.Lorna Brown and Frid-Jimenez. And Lorna Brown, I should say, is a member of the collective Other Sites, and Colin is also here. And sorry, Marco. Yeah. So representing Other Sites, excuse me, who are all artists in the Belkin exhibition, The Structure of Smoke. And they're going to talk about how their works use and address systems of value to reveal the hidden dynamics of our relationship to the material world, particularly in the ways that development, quote unquote development, is a smokescreen for systems out of balance. So developer lightning is a term that Lorna brought to our attention when we were in pre-meeting, and it's a term that's also known as redevelopment by match, or a developer's special. It's a colloquial term for a suspicious fire that destroys an old, protected, or unprofitable building, such as normally houses artists' studios, allowing its replacement with a more lucrative development. This form of suspected arson is used to gentrify, and it bypasses red tape and other heritage designations and restrictions, for example. So together, we brought together these panelists to broach the play between art, technology, and development, developers building in cities, subdivisions, for art, and developers building technological systems, digital systems, AI, and do this in relationship to the land and waters, fire and smoke, both literally and metaphorically. In their work, the artists have variously taken up questions of our constructed environments, architectural, social, digital, whether as a form of wealth accumulation or to enable technological systems, and how this intersects with our conceptions and relations to land, extraction, and energy. We hope the discussion will consider the values associated with the relationships between larger systems and artistic resistance, materiality, and abstraction. Development structures and systems are not neutral, not inherently negative.
Through their works, the three artists ask how the works can introduce a friction in the use or reading of these systems, especially for systems that we're being forced into without our full consent, like AI. So they're going to talk specifically about their projects, but I just wanted to say both Samuel and Lorna's works examine the fantasy of real estate as a container for ideals, for capital, and the abstraction of wealth accumulation and ownership over other possible material relations to the world. And Lorna will talk about the fire economy, I'm sure. That also relies on valuation with the crude numbers, as Amber is also thinking about AI and the reliance on data, inserting friction into the capitalist race to continuously crunch numbers. And so we're sort of interested in maybe what that point of friction is in all of these practices. So we're hoping that each of you will talk for a short period of time, 10 minutes, allow for a conversation between you three and with the audience. And that will take us to 3 o'clock. So bear with me while I do very quick introductions. I feel like many of you know these artists, but Samuel Roy-Bois is an artist and associate professor in sculpture at UBC Okanagan. His practice encompasses installation, sculpture, and photography, focusing on the built environment, vernacular practices, and art as an emergent phenomenon, which we talked about last night, which I find very interesting. His work has been featured in exhibitions at the Musée d'Art Contemporain in Montreal, the Odeon Art Museum in Whistler, and the Esker Foundation in Calgary. Samuel received the Vancouver Mayor's Award in 2012 and the Schaubel Foundation Viva Award in 2021. Lorna Brown is a Vancouver-based visual artist, curator, writer, and editor. She is a founding and ongoing member of Other Sites for Artists projects. She has been director-curator of Art Speak Gallery, acting director-curator at the Belkin, and has exhibited her own work internationally since 1984, as well as taught at SFU and Emily Carr, where she received an honorary doctorate of letters in 2015. Her awards include the Schaubel Foundation Viva Award and the Council Paris Studio, and most recently, the Belkin Curatorial Award. And Amber Frid-Jimenez is an artist who situates her work at the intersection of art, culture, and technology through installations, video, printmaking, code, and artist books. She's an associate professor at Emily Carr University, where she served as Canada Research Chair in Art and Design Technology 2014 to 2024, and directs the Studio for Extensive Aesthetics. She's taught at MIT, RISD, Brown, Bergen Academy of Art and Design, and recent exhibitions include those at Monica Reyes Gallery here in Vancouver, Vancouver Art Gallery, Queens Museum, New York, as well as a large-scale video commission in Washington, D.C. So we're going to hear from you in this order, and we'll be happy to have the lights in. Wow.
Thank you very much, Melanie, for this great introduction. I'm very pleased to be sharing the panel with such amazing people. Thanks to, again, Melanie and Tanya to invite me to be part of that exhibition. I think it's a timely event, timely exhibition, and I'm quite honored to be surrounded with amazing artists. Today I will be talking about my practice, about the projects that are in that exhibition, more specifically, and other sculptural projects that I've done that are related to those same notions. Perfect. So I'll be talking about my work, about certain ideas that might provide context to understand what I'm doing, but also about a very personal experience that I have had with fire. I've been living in the Okanagan for the past 10 years, living in Lake Country to be more precise, and in 2023 we experienced the fires came very close to our house. I'll get into that in a minute. Maybe as a way to frame my presentation, I came across this description or definition of architecture, which I find interesting. Architecture can be understood as a material organization that regulates and brings order to energy flows, and simultaneously and inseparably as an energetic organization that stabilizes and maintains material form. I quite like that because it's kind of acknowledging the architecture as something which is impermanent and in constant dialogue with its immediate environment, with materiality and the outcome of several choices and decisions. I'd like also to maybe use this definition as a way to describe maybe sculpture. Maybe you can think about sculpture as a way to regulate energy, and maybe you can think about a forest as well as a way to regulate energy. So this is a video that I took in August 2023. This is from my backyard. We had spent the night looking across the lake at the fire starting. It started as I don't know why I feel so kind of emotional, but it started as an event that took place across the lake, kind of far away from us. The title of my presentation, From Index to Habitat, points to that. My first experience with the smoke was quite indexical. The smoke was indicating an event that was taking place far away, right? An index being a category of sign, right? We have symbols, we have icons. An index would be like a footprint on the beach, right? Kind of indicating the presence of somebody who walk there. So smoke is indexical of a certain disorganization of the distribution of energy. And so until that point, smoke was quite indexical, but slowly migrated from that status of index to the status of habitat. So the smoke itself became the environment through which I would be evolving for the following 10 days. So something like 10 minutes after I shot that video, we got an order to evacuate, and we were asked to leave our place. We didn't know where to go really, so we ended up at Norman's Diners for a while, trying to figure out where we'd be going next. And we could see the lights changing, smoke filling up the air. It was quite intense. It's difficult to talk about wildfires without talking the way that we talk about the extractive strategies that are being used to exploit the forest, basically. So over the last 15 years, Crownland harvesting has averaged 180,000 hectares per year, with the majority of logging using clear cut with reserves. And most of that material being harvested is being used for construction. Up to 83% of that is for lumber, for plywood, and stuff like that. It's kind of difficult to get a sense of what 180,000 hectares represents. So I made myself a little map of what that could mean. So on a yearly basis, this is the amount of forest which is being harvested in BC. And if you think about that year after year, there is a square of that size which is being harvested. I made another map. I did not include that in my presentation, but I made a map and glued together all these squares. And over a span of 10 years, I could clear cut my way all the way from Vancouver to the Okanagan, which is quite concerning. In November, just past November, there was a report that had been produced regarding the exploitation of the forest, the over-harvesting of the forest, that was explicit regarding the fact that we were over-harvesting twice the quantity of wood that should have been harvested. The government did hide that report, did not share it with the public. It did leak in the past November, so now we're aware of the situation. But Yeah. So to link over-harvesting, exploitation of the forest, and my own work, I think it would be great to talk about construction and the way lumber is being used, not just in BC, but across North America. This picture is an archival picture that was taken in Naramata. Naramata is on the east side of the Okanagan Lake, not too far from where I live. And this is, on this picture, you can see a good example of what is called balloon framing. At the very top of the image, I don't know if you can see that, but there is a man sitting on the structure right there. And if you look at the studs that are between his legs, you can follow them all the way from the top of that structure all the way to the bottom. And this is a very good example of balloon framing because it's a method where the studs go from the base of the building all the way to the rafters. We stopped building that way because these cavities, these spaces between the studs acted as shielding. So as soon as a fire would be declared at the base of the building, the fire would run up all the way to the rafters and would uncoat the entire building very, very quickly. As a quick history for balloon framing, we often think of balloon framing as some type of vernacular type of architecture of way of building, but it has a very specific origin. George Washington Snow is credited as being the inventor of balloon framing back in 1832. In Chicago region, back when Chicago had a population of about 100 settlers, and the population was growing very, very rapidly between 1832 and 1900. The population went from 100 settlers to almost 1.7 million inhabitants for the Chicago region. So there was a great need for housing, obviously. Great need for, of course, resources. So at that point, Snow ran into the problem of getting enough people to build houses. Until 1832, the main way to build homes was to use timber. Timber framing is quite complex and requires quite a bit of skills. Each element is basically carved. These houses are built with mallets and chisels, and so it does require a lot of manpower, a very specific type of wood as well, but mostly skills. So Snow developed this method of building, this balloon framing, that is not requiring much skills. Materials can easily be transported to a site. Material can also be moved easily by 2 or 3 people. Also relying on the fact that nails, cut nails or industrially made nails were now available, made balloon framing, made it grow exponentially. Until, just to talk about the nails, until that point, we don't really think about that, but nails were forged. Nails had to be made one by one. So as soon as we managed to find a way to produce nails on a larger scale, we were able to build homes on a much larger scale as well, which again put pressure on the forest, on the environment. So the pictures that I have here are mostly from the States here, from the East Coast, but definitely it is a method of building which is ubiquitous across North America. And just to give you an example of the kind of work that was involved in timber framing before 1830s, this is a good example of how a piece of wood will be carved and produced and sculpted, basically. It's it would require quite a bit of skills. The other notion which is interesting when I think about balloon framing is the utopian projection that it carries. It provides the impression that any form can be realized, or that there are no limitations on how you can think architecture or you can think volumes and forms. Of course, it's not the case. It's not true, but it does carry with it the sense that there's this possibility of this ever-expanding self-expression. And so I really picked up on that idea and tried to introduce this way of thinking, or this utopian approach within my practice. This obviously is from the exhibition. You can see some of the sculptures that are in the show, and the two photographs also are in the exhibition. So just about the sculpture itself, they're somehow using the language of balloon frame, using the same kind of spacing, the same kind of assembly, but also proposing forms that are suggesting some type of possibility of self-expression, or to a certain extent, the possibility that the tangibility of the architectural form can lead to a certain type of abstraction. The sculptures that are in this exhibition here at the Belkin are quite small, but I've done those in various dimensions. These were recently presented at the Burnham Art Gallery. This one is about maybe 8 foot or something like that. But it seems still using the same kind of principles. If I can say a few words about the photographs that are in the show, this is a bunch of images showing the process itself. This is me just scrolling on my DSLR camera, showing how these images were produced. These were shot on Spion Cap, which is a small mountain not too far from where I live, and they were shot very shortly after the fire. For some reason, right after the fire, I felt the need to burn wood myself. Strangely enough, on my property, there was not much burnt wood left. The fire had burned. There were still trees standing, but any branch that was on the ground had burned completely. So there was not much left that I could use to produce these photographs. So I did burn these images myself. And so with the help of an assistant, we brought that burnt material to Spion Cap, and on that location, placed these items together to create these temporary sculptures. I often talk about that work as photographs, but they could be described as documentations of ephemeral sculptures. So they're basically small items or objects that are being placed and secured to balance for a very short moment of time, just enough for me to document their presence and give the impression that they can combat the chaos that is that we are embedded within. So in this exhibition, I have these two photographs that are almost similar, but both of them are from a different sculpture. And maybe I can conclude talking about returning to that notion of indexicality and how after the fire or during the fires, we found ourselves embedded in this quite eerie environment, not knowing exactly how long that would last. After a while, the smoke dissipated. We were able to come back, return to our homes. But following that very intense experience, we were reminded of the presence of the fire quite punctually with these zombie fires that would emerge here and there. So between September until I would say February, we had smoke coming out the ground. So the fire had burrowed in the ground and would kind of rest there and re-emerge once in a while to remind us of the severity of the situation. Okay, and that's my son actually helping me out putting one of those zombie fires out. Thank you very much.
First test. So yeah, before I talk about the Monument to Mysterious Fires project, I just wanted to, because people may not be familiar with other sites, that we're a collective dedicated to challenging perceptions, encouraging discourse, and asking questions about shared social spaces. We present projects that consider the aesthetic, economic, and regulatory conditions of public places and public life. And we're 20 years old this year. Colin, Marco, Clint Burnham used to be on the board. Shout out to Clint. Here's the folks that are involved. Sunshine Fair is our GM. Jennifer Vanderpool is a Fleet GM. Our current board members are Jordan Wilson, Kamala Todd, Holly Schmidt, Justin Langlois, and Jay Parr. And the whole producer team also includes myself and Barbara Cole and April Thompson. Just wanted to lay out this structure because I think the administrative structure is always part of content. Monument for Mysterious Fires grew out of an alternative community consultation that we held in July 2013. I don't know if folks are familiar with the Kingsgate Mall, we call it Hell's Gate Mall. We of the neighborhood. We set up an alternative community consultation project because at that time it looked like that lot was going to be developed, and we were unhappy with how the city usually organizes consultation processes, in that there's a predetermined outcome and people come and you get a choice A, B, or C, which many people want. So what we did was we set up an open studio event at the mall just outside the liquor store. The project was called I Know What I Want. And what we did was we offered to make small models of residents' desires for the future of the neighborhood. We got a bunch of materials from the mall's dollar store, and the models were combined and recombined on an aerial plan of the adjacent intersection. People's desires kind of range from the whimsical, so some people wanted a pony ranch, to practical concerns such as affordable housing and food security. It was a research project that proposed an alternative by including the generative and resisting principle of friction. Participants either helped or watched us struggle to realize their desires. And so we were, and vulnerability came up earlier this morning, we were equally vulnerable to those offering their ideas as we tried to make stuff out of pipe cleaners and so forth. This is a good jazz bar, which we still need in the neighborhood. So one desire was, and I couldn't find an image of it, was a little model of, there was a desire in the neighborhood for a monument to the mysterious fires of Main Street. And we made a plasticine, it was lovely. And this idea stuck around. This one striking desire from the consultation process was for a monument to the mysterious fires that had occurred in Main Street area over the previous several years. So Jen Y, former producer team member, was the inspiration for this set of matches, which is in the exhibition. And on the back, it just listed the addresses of the fires up to that point. Then, Christmas morning, 2009, humble studio building burned down. It was a studio where Barbara and I and 19 artists in total had their studios on Broadway between Kingsway and Main. This image of the studio is taken from the second floor of the building across the street, and we were perched in Emma Lancaster's office using the lens of the camera to examine the site since we weren't allowed in at that point. It's hard to feel sentimental about the building. It was kind of dumpy, badly renovated, very low rent, but ultimately super affordable studio building. So fast forward to an invitation from Capture Festival to participate using the 4 billboards that circled a parking lot in Mount Pleasant. So developed by the team which at that time included Jen Y, Vanessa Kwan, Jody Lowe, as well as other producers. Monument to Mysterious Fires transformed both sides of 2 billboards in the parking lot at Quebec and 6th Avenue into a temporary monument commemorating the Christmas 2009 fire alongside the Great Fire of 1886, an event that hearkened the development of Mount Pleasant itself. The project was part of the 2015 iteration of Capture Festival. The billboard space was donated by Pattison. The text billboard panels make reference to the fire economy, an acronym for finance, insurance, and real estate, which certainly at that time was the world's principal force of wealth creation. It was understood to transform our political, economic, and social landscapes with a complex web of global finance, light regulation, debt, risk tolerance, and property bubbles. And it certainly has very specific implications in Vancouver. I'll think of a million ways that the fire economy impacts our lives here. Instability accompanies this new fire economy, this new orthodoxy, and according to authors such as Jane Kelsey, from rising inequality and ballooning household debt to a global financial crisis and fiscal austerity agendas. Fire economy first came into currency in the 80s to describe the elements of the economy that generate revenue through rising asset prices via speculation and interest on debt. Some businesses in the fire economy include banks and credit unions, insurance agencies, mortgage brokers, and real estate agencies. Generally, it's the business of money, not the business of goods or services. The parking lot, of course, I think it's gone now. Since been developed as part of the ongoing and accelerated boom in the Main and Broadway area. And so that billboard revenue stream has ostensibly been relocated as well. In 2015, the City of Vancouver passed a motion to formally acknowledge the role of First Nations members who saved lives during the city's Great Fire of 1886. According to historians, only 3 of the estimated 1,000 buildings in the city were left standing after the fire swept through the city in less than 30 minutes. Dozens perished. Many people jumped into the Burrard Inlet to escape the flames and would have perished if they weren't rescued by Indigenous paddlers who arrived from North Vancouver when they saw the destruction. The other interesting thing about this image too is that the City Hall, I think the first City Hall was a tent. Just as fire is indifferent to what it burns, the fire economy is indifferent to the local, social, and economic context that its operations affect. Sociologist Saskia Sassen has called it the steam engine of our time, a new powerful force that's transforming economies, but also having wide-ranging impacts on social, environmental, and cultural conditions. The billboards are kind of set perpendicular to one another, and we use that setup to carve out a sculptural space within the parking lot in which to gather and reflect on the transformation of the city. So we had a tailgate party. We rented a few spaces, set up tables, and invited the community to come and share their stories or reminiscences of fires in the neighborhood. Addressing the east, west, and north-south axes of the city and how they factor in the currency of views and the escalation of property values creeping eastward. Monument to Mysterious Fires triggered historical and recent memories of the neighborhood. A foundation of these historical memories are, of course, recurrent dispossessions and displacements through colonization. That's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm just delighted to be a part of this conversation and part of the show with so many brilliant people. Melanie and Tanya asked me to describe how I made the work included in the show. So I thought I'd take the next 10 minutes to get into the process behind the work. And I'll show a few additional pieces from the same series, which perhaps will help clarify that process. So the piece in the exhibition is called Untitled Tree Diagram Number 1. And it's from a series I produced in 2009. It is in the square frame there on the far right, next to Samuel's balloon series in the center of the gallery and Kathy Slade's scrying here on the back wall. When Melanie first approached me about the structure of smoke, I was interested because smoke obscures vision, offering a metaphor for opacity. And opacity can work in different ways depending on who wields it. For an individual, it can provide a means of resisting systemic domination and subjugation. And for me, growing up in the Latin American diaspora, I watched my mother going back and forth from Costa Rica to the US, negotiating her opacity in various ways. And now that I've moved to Canada, I find myself very aware and also being comforted by this idea that the complexity of who I am might not be known to the people around me. And so the idea of opacity and being not fully known somehow comforts me, having a way to name that. In contrast, opacity can be used by corporations to obscure their harmful practices of data extractivism, enabling the surveillance and digital tracking of contemporary AI systems. In short, opacity can enable domination or resistance to it. Opacity plays a role in my work as it relates to machine learning algorithms, the technical process behind today's AI, and which I've been using alongside other material procedures and techniques to make art for the last 20 years. I produced this work while working in an AI group at MIT in the early 2000s, where latent semantic analysis was being developed, which is the precursor to today's large language models that underlie most of AI systems. Latent semantic analysis is an algorithm that takes a large body of text or a corpus of literature and clusters the words based on 3 parameters. Semantic adjacency, which refers to the statistical proximity of words, which words are close to which other words, word frequency, what occurs next to what, and how many times it occurs, and grammatical structure, like syntax and tense. So to do this, latent semantic analysis builds a tree structure based on the text, where relationships between words are modeled like a family tree, with parents, grandparents, and children. The technical term for this tree structure is a dendrogram, which is a type of diagram used by scientists for things like taxonomy, and to establish nested relationships within a field of knowledge. The lines define the semantic tree here. The program I wrote wrapped the dendrogram into a circle and draws the vectors at specific line weights. So that tree forms the piece, and you can see that some of the branching that's happening from the middle there. In scientific contexts, dendrograms are typically used for discovery, to analyze a complex data set in order to extract meaning, to find essentially a signal from noise. At the time, most applications of latent semantic analysis were designed to yield information for specific ends. For example, a typical application would have been to search patent databases, enabling drug companies to decide where to allocate their development efforts to generate the greatest profits. I was more interested in using this powerful emerging tool to see how it might offer a reflection of ourselves through cultural production. So I fed the software the entire text of James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, which in retrospect was an absurd act that grew probably out of a frustration with the technical environment I was in. Published in 1939, Joyce's dreamlike novel embodies a radical moment of experimentation in Irish literature. Its polyglot language, much of which was invented by the author, resists singular interpretations. Its complex circular time structure does not submit easily to the extraction of information. The first sentence of the novel finishes the last sentence 629 pages later in a kind of foreshadowing of algorithmic recursion. I was inspired by a generation of artists who used technology to make art that questioned their context, whether it be the military-industrial complex or pressures of corporate research funding. Oh, I was meant to probably have done that before. Since Jorge Kepish founded the Center for Advanced Visual Studies at MIT in 1967, artists like Aldo Tambellini, Otto Pine, Marianne Amaker, and later, while I was there, Joan Jonas, used technology to enable reflection, making art that critiqued its application for military domination and capitalistic ends. So inspired by Jonas's experimental works, which turned surveillance technology back onto her body as a means of self-examination, I sought to apply early semantic technologies as a distorted mirror in which to see reflections of our own cultural production. And in its inscrutability, Finnegan's Wake offers a kind of bulwark against the technological systems that increasingly encroached into our reality. So the black lines here are the tree structures of meaning in the language of Finnegan's Wake as interpreted by the machine. For this drawing, I've removed the words themselves so we could see how the algorithm interprets the structure of the novel more clearly. I wasn't interested in creating a prosthetic for reading Finnegan's Wake, something that would make it easier to read or understand the individual words, but rather, I wanted to lay bare the structure of the machine translation in the form of a tree. The individual words, which might be thought of as the leaves of the tree in this analogy, have been stripped away. They would be right at the little line there, the ends. What remains is the structure, the shape of the novel's internal semantic logic, rendered as a visual pattern printed on cold-pressed paper, roughly 28 by 28 inches. This is another one in the series, and it sort of resembles a bit more like folded lace. So this piece is a part of a larger series of Finnegan's Wake drawings using black lines on printed paper. The gendergram is dense at the center, radiating outward. Sometimes I see the rings of a bisected tree trunk. Other people have told me they see an architectural landscape or a circular saw blade. The code I wrote is dynamic, which sets the gendergram spinning on its center axis as it interprets the text through the movement of my gesture. The static ink on paper captures something of that movement. I think of the print as a kind of after image, what the algorithm leaves behind when the movement stops, the way staring into a bright light burns a shape into your vision. Others in the series I made as field drawings of layer diagrams. Like smoke, what you see is real and has effects at a large scale, but you cannot see through it to the source. The data goes in, something comes out. The middle is a cloud of smoke. Smoke is a useful metaphor for what machine learning systems do. They process the world into outputs whose internal logic is invisible. The algorithm produces a result, a classification, a prediction, a recommendation, or a generated image. But the reasoning is occluded. Working as an artist at an Institute of Technology 2 decades ago, I became acutely aware of the fundamental asymmetry, the system's opacity, and the total legibility it attempts to extract from its source materials. Withholding the words in the piece was a way of refusing that logic from within the system itself. Untitled tree diagram number 1 describes the structure, but offers no interpretation. The work tells you what it is, but withholds what it means. Sometime after making the series, I came across the Martinican philosopher and poet Edward Glissant. For Glissant, the demand for total transparency is colonial. In his 1997 book, Poetics of Relation, Glissant argues for the right of a person, a group of people, a culture, to remain not fully known. Opacity is a poetic condition related to one another and acts as a form of self-determination and illegibility, an act of resistance to outside systems of power. What interests me is working through the machine's opacity to consider my own. By exploring the opacity of the so-called black box, we may learn how to attend to our own in the face of colonial enclosure. That is, using the system's own inscrutability to embody pluralistic forms of experience and knowing. This is one of Joan Jonas's pieces called Song de Leg, which uses a kind of a surveillance camera from above to inscribe a circle on the sidewalk. As an artist, I want multiple readings of my work. Art's enduring quality is that it resists being reduced to a single interpretation. Art remains, in Glissant's sense, irreducible and untranslatable. As data extractivism accelerates and surveillance become infrastructural, I want to understand the framework of opacity, its poetics, and its asymmetries. This work is a kind of resistance to fitting, or rather, an act of unfitting dominant models, a way of flipping the goal on its head. I try to think of this as something like staring into a flame and then blowing it out and watching the smoke dissipate into the air.
Blowing smoke, we like that. Yeah. Thank you, Dree. I think we are crunched for time, so maybe instead of me even asking you anything, I would like to see if you have a response to each other, anything that you want to kick off with about resisting utility, resisting developer logic, opacity, blowing smoke. I guess with hold on, I make you.
So, Sandra, it makes me think of and the talks this morning about how specifically local the origins of the desire, the motivation for the work. Because certainly I think we think of other sides of our work as being hyper local, and it's public also being very specifically local.
Yeah, maybe I can bring up that notion of art as a emergent phenomenon.
Right.
Because in my mind, it's an artwork is the outcome of a number of forces that are guiding its own production, rather than the outcome of a series of decisions. I don't think that as artists we're making that many decisions. I think we're guided by our upbringing, our culture, our access to certain materials, our access to technology and knowledge and resources. We're finding ourselves at the confluence of all these different tensions and forces. And maybe our role is to reveal that very tension and to bring attention to maybe specific phenomena. I feel that the idea that the artist has a lot of agency in the production of the work of art, I don't think that's really the case. I think we're pretty much we're more at the mercy of the surrounding conditions than anything else.
How does that connect with your work? At the mercy of surrounding conditions.
Because Amber, you've also talked about so clearly about the choices that can be made, say, in AI, to do exactly as you did, as opposed, to hone the models, to use them in targeted ways. Yeah.
Well, I find it, I don't know if you could.
Yeah.
I find it interesting because that resonates with me despite the deliberate process that I need to go through. I still feel very out of control, and I still feel like on the edge of understanding. I don't know why I'm doing things when I'm doing them. It's only in after the fact, despite the kind of procedural setup that must be done. It still requires all of this kind of resisting the urge to second guess or, what am I doing with it? Because it's almost as if I'm not making the decisions entirely consciously. So that resonates.
Yeah. I think that AI is kind of, and what I find interesting in your work is revealing the fact that we're entering this kind of epistemic crisis. And can you talk about it a little bit, like having access to a lot of information and knowledge, but that information and knowledge do not guide our behavior. So I think that that awareness is quite troubling, and it's also I think that's the challenge that we're facing, really, how to integrate that knowledge and information within our relationship with the world, how it can transform how we connect with the environment and the surrounding behavior.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually thinking about the relationship between the way that other sites works in environments, and sort of through the billboard, through these kind of, by turning things also kind of on their head, and so that sort of the kind of aspect of other sites' work, that sort of institutional critique, resonates, I think, with the kind of with my process for that reason, to inspire for me in that way, because I think you're working very kind of through these larger urban systems, and yet there's still systems that kind of operate through these things, like little strange, opaque systems, like develop for lightning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think also there's like this notion of globalized systems, at like even the billboard itself is like the standardized format. They're the same everywhere, the same dimensions, and the original image can be sent digitally, output and installed in, pretty much any billboard in North America. So that's this template that within which we are trying to make that space like a park where people can come together and actually have a conversation. So using the global, making hyper local the impact of globalized systems, for sure. At least in the case of that project, and maybe also the digital natives project that we did.
I like how you're relying on already existing structures to maybe subvert the current conversation or the discourse, but not necessarily trying to develop new frameworks or new structures, but really kind of exploring what is already existing and deviate maybe some of that.
Yeah, I think it's also being invited and allowing back to this notion of vulnerability. So, for instance, with the Fleet project, which is their mobile studios that we've developed that are placed in different locations, they're totally reliant on building relationships with the people that can receive them. So that's how the work has been going. And it's an extreme vulnerability. You have no control over where you can go, how long you can stay there, what you can provide, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think coming out of that I Know What I Want project at the Kingsgate Mall, that notion of vulnerability is something that really continues.
I'm wondering if there are questions from the audience about subverting templates or ways that we can cause friction, or where the developer lightning could be instigated as something positive for change. So I'm wondering if anyone has a question from the audience. Or we can keep, yeah. Oh yes, Clint.
Thank you. And I think Lorna has so much to say about fire, of course. Fire just 2 weeks ago in Pleasant. Well, I have a question for Amber, and it's about the visualization image that the first work you showed, the tree image. And I wonder about it because the tree ring. We see a tree ring. And in my book, I talk about a scene in Hitchcock's Vertigo, where they're in the redwood forest, and there's a tree ring there, and it has all these stupid colonial events marked out. The 1066 battle pacing, discovery of America, whatever, the Liberty Bell, whatever. And the way in which that image has become this template in some ways for a really futile attempt to impose ordered knowledge onto a dead tree, onto this scar or a trophy or some kind. So I was wondering, in terms of what your image is, how you did talk, I think at some point, something it's called tree diagram, but it looks like it's a tree cut as well. I wonder if you have any thoughts in that direction.
About the imposition of the tree?
Yeah, and what those what the tree ring has this kind of resource extractivist, fake tourist kind of didactic panel.
I think it's interesting because knowing the mathematical, so I came up with this drawing based on just reading papers on algorithms. And I wasn't an expert, I was an artist trying to discern this math. I like mathematics, I think it's interesting. So I read it and just repeatedly draw. And the algorithms kind of start to, over time, after repeated readings, take shape in my mind. But they're shaped as a kind of, Lacanian diagram, a kind of diagram that's sort of speculative. and I don't know what it's going to be until I, so that's why it's out of control, because I kind of, okay, we're talking about trees. Okay, I'm drawing. So it actually comes out of a very kind of impulsive desire to understand. But I think the imposition is actually, the mathematics is describing tree structures. I didn't know that it was going to come up with something that looked like a stain or a stamped bisected tree. That's when I knew that I was done with the work. Not it just appeared and started to form itself, and then I stopped. So I don't have an answer, but that's
but also I think at some point you said you took the words out, like right. So the words are fitting into echo or what have you. So there's like almost like a reversal thing there.
Yeah.
You're not labeling it.
Right.
You're unlabeling it, and therefore we see it as a kind of visualization. Thank you.
Yeah.
Denise, I have a question for Samuel. I'm interested in the kinds of nails that you use nails in your work, and if you do these sculptures by hand, or whether you get them made for you like solid wood, and what's this idea of the history of that form that you're using, and whether you're using it in a completely new way now.
It's funny that question comes up a lot. Kind of nails I use. I'm just working with pin nails, so it's just a typical. If you worked with a brad nailer before, it's like a smaller version of a brad nailer with these tiny little pins that will not split the wood. So it's a very simple process. And I think it's difficult to tell on these images, but I think that the simplicity of the process is quite obvious when you are confronted with the work. And you can see the holes that the nails made. You can see some of the glue as well. So I think that the making of the work, the process itself, is being revealed, in the sculpture, right? For me, that's important. It's not overt, but I think it's present. But I also cherish that simplicity, the fact that it's just me trimming these pieces of wood on my table saw in my basement and cutting them up and putting them together. It's a very meditative process, very rudimentary. I work with simple tools, with simple means as well, often with reused recycled wood, not recycled, and old crates, basically. Most of them are made out of old crates. So I think that simplicities and that matter-of-factness are important.
Yeah.
Try this just formulate the question. Really interesting to understand how you think about the exhibition, the exposition, the showing of these works that contain so much invisible information, the algorithm, even the hand of the person who's assisting you, Samuel, and then also, all these forgotten histories in the city that are revealed with these billboards, which often carry ads that don't exactly want to ask you to remember much. They're kind of obliterating memory. And maybe also to Melanie, because you're curating an exhibition and really strategizing how to show works that are these sort of tips of icebergs.
Tanya and I will give a tour shortly, but I think we can say that we feel like this was an exhibition. I'll just say that we are. It's not solely about wildfire. It's about like thinking through fire, and it's a starting place, right? And so we wanted to make sure that fire in its devastating forms, in its supportive forms, but also like as a technology, as particularly here, like as a tool for building worlds that are both like positive and negative, is sort of implicated. And so, yeah, these are massive projects in some regards that should have their own, and they have had space around them, but to bring them together for this conversation was what we hoped would spark. And I'm sorry for puns, I feel like everybody's been doing it. Spark something that would allow us to keep thinking together. Yeah, so that's all I'll say about that.
I think as far as the hidden histories, like that work was from quite a long time ago. The fires have moved east. They're now along Hastings Street, right? And you could almost kind of follow the relationship between development and the sacrificial buildings. But echoing back to the Great Fire, the histories of beyond and before Vancouver was here, you don't really expect to see a kind of historical analysis on a billboard, but what you can use a billboard to do is to point people through whatever is through that unexpected image or that paradoxical image to think about that site specifically. And I think, audiences for the museum are very different than audiences just wandering through or parking. And so it's a different form of address. It needs to have a different rhetoric. And then also to think about, we've had a similar kind of tactic with other projects where we have just used parking spaces or parking lots or parks themselves as spaces to gather. So it's somewhere between those two modes of address, this very declarative, large scale thing and much more intimate face-to-face outside the liquor store. I don't know if that helped, but
I like the question. I think it's a great question, especially in terms of photography. Because I think about photography, often we think about photography as a window into the world, but in my mind, it's more a veil on the rest of the universe, right? And we just get to see. So that's the first blinding, right? You hide the rest of the world and you just show a portion of it. The second blinding is a selection of what image will surface. You've seen that reel with, I don't know, maybe 200 images. I'm showing 2 out of these 200. The other ones will never be seen. Maybe you're lucky today, you've seen them quickly. But there is this other blinding which is taking place as well. Maybe it will resurface at some point, but there is this selection process which is it's about hiding, right? I'm just going to show this and not that. Yeah, I think that's essential. This relationship with the shown and the hidden.
Yeah, I mean, that was so well put. I think, I feel similarly in that sense of for me, I guess this notion of there's so much that I don't show of this work. So I agree that there's a really strong desire to limit and find just the curated piece that and for me and also that you mentioned pointing, this kind of it is a kind of, because it's such a specific finite curated choice of what to show and what not to show, to keep hidden, it does become a certain kind of pointer. I mean, in this case, for this piece, there was a practical reason why. There was I really refused to make it an analytical version, to tell us more about Finnegan's Wake. I really needed to do that because I was in the environment at the time, and so there was a sort of a threat for it being subverted back into the actual engine that makes an MIT run, So for me, I had to get rid of the words as a real matter of that context. And then that persisted because it's part of the story of the work. So it marks a certain kind of history. And I think, yeah, I've contemplated changing it to Finnegan's Wake, now that I'm not in that context, but it doesn't work. It's just so much a part of the impulse to make the piece to begin with that it needs to be that opaque.
Thank you, Amber, Samuel, and Burnham. Thank you all for